Good morning. Miss Julie.
How are you?
Good. Well, how are you? How are you?
Hi.
I've met you before.
I have the same.
We've had several meetings up at the base.
How are you?
So I'm new to this too, so I'm now the board. You still learning for it's fun. Good. How's yourself? Good old family.
It's Thursday, March 31st.
Still surviving.
That ain't gonna work. Wednesday.
I think I'm okay. You're not retired, no?
Well,
It's
been busy.
That is
everything from moved in a new house.
That is
all those new things.
state of line.
Yeah.
We gotta make it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Thursday, we make a decision. We don't leave. It might be here a while.
Well,
But yeah, I'm on a band.
He still lives there.
I think you got someone today. Really?
57.
Oh my gosh. That's a lot.
Yes, that's like double. They had, we had service.
22 years since I retired.
I'm good.
Okay.
So we just. That's why I thought I worded that like.
I'm not sure.
Maybe stay for a couple more weeks.
Yeah, make them feel comfortable. Every day.
How was Easter? Yeah, I like us all dressed the same. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
I'll announce it if you.
That love is second.
Good, how are you?
Did you hear that he was going to be here?
Yes.
And one of them was
Better offer?
Well, good morning. I've got 9:30 and it's time for our March 28th board meeting. And we'll call this to order right now. And if you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please, Bruce, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, I would like to also introduce, if he is here, Justin Layton. Justin, welcome. He is the new Washington State Transportation Agency Director.
Washington State Transit Association
There you
Executive
go.
Director.
All right, there, I'll get you. Thanks for joining us.
Yes.
And do you have anything to present to us that you would like to say briefly before we move on with our regular agenda?
Yeah, I just have a couple of handouts. Sorry, I just drove in from Tacoma, so it was a bit of a haul through Seattle, as you can imagine, this morning.
We're hoping we're going to help solve that problem.
You know what? Transit can be part of that. So I'll just hand out a couple of handouts that I have that kind of explain a little bit of Washington State Transit Association and hi, how are you? And who our members are, and a little bit about public transportation in Washington State. We are a member services organization. The way I described it to my mother was we're the Chamber of Commerce for Public Transportation in Washington State. Many of you may be familiar with the Association of Washington Cities, the Association of Washington Counties, and we are basically that exact same type of organization for transit. We have 31 members in our association. 30 are public transit agencies, such as Island Transit, and one of them is actually Washington State Department of Transportation in the Public Transportation Division. We have dues that we assess from our members, and most of all public transit agencies in Washington are members, except for I think 2 or 3 like SELA and Union Gap over in Yakima. In total, we have over 185 million transit boardings in Washington State alone. As you can imagine, a lot of those come from King County Metro or Sound Transit or the Puget Sound Transit agencies. However, we have a large amount of need in the rural communities and across our state. The association also has 12 subcommittees that meet. In fact, I was just met Sean here this past week over in Pullman as our operations committee met. We have an HR committee, we have a legal committee, a legislative committee, and I think that is probably our most active committee is the legislative committee. We have 2 lobbyists in Olympia. One that manages all of just kind of our general legislative agenda and priorities, and the other one that focuses on small and mid-sized transit association needs. And that's sort of where Island Transit fits in. One of our biggest priorities this year was to get a proviso in the budget that would assess regional service outside of public transit agencies' areas. There is a lot of that around the state. A lot of agencies reach far outside of their boundaries to deliver regional service that connect people. And that's really what public transit is, right? It's connecting people from point A to point B where they need to go. People don't care about lines on a map, county lines, city lines, and they just really want to get to places. So that's what we're focused on. This is month 3 for me on the job, and so I'm really excited. My past experiences, I was at Pierce Transit for 5 years. I worked on government relations there, and prior to that, I was a high school teacher. So I've quite gone far from where I came out of college to here. I'm excited to work with agencies like Island Transit, and I'm very happy that Ken has asked me to be here today, and I'm actually going to be on my way to Whatcom Transit this afternoon to visit with them. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. I'm going to watch your meeting and chat with you afterwards as well.
Well, Justin, I have a quick question
Yes.
for you. You get involved in the legislative process as a lobbying agency like Washington State Association of Cities?
Yes.
Good. Remember who Island Transit is when you're looking at that budget, okay?
We certainly do. We have kind of a rule that we do no harm to each other. So if there is a legislative priority that comes up, we make sure that everybody is protected. And we advocate to generally affect everyone positively. And so when we do our best, that means we're getting money, we're passing legislation that protects us, makes us more efficient, that helps us operate better, that is making sure that our passengers are safe and our agency is safe as well. And so we are pretty active in Olympia. We tend to have a full legislative agenda each year. And of course, this year was not going to be a year where we got money. It was basically going to be a year of just policy base, and even those bills barely got it out. I think that there was 100 or so transportation bills that were introduced, and only I think less than a handful actually passed, and the governor signed, including on Friday he signed the supplemental transportation budget, which has that proviso in it that we worked really hard on as well.
Thank you very much. Before we move on with our agenda, any other questions here on the board?
How are people elected to your board, or how does this Island Transit have representation on your policy board or lobby board?
That's a really good question. Our governance and our bylaws state that every executive director, general manager, CEO, they all have different names, of a public transit agency of our membership is a board member. So Ken is a board member, the CEO of Snow Transit is a board member, the general manager of TransGo in Okanagan is a board member. And then the director of public transportation at WashDOT is a board member for them as well. So those make up our board member, and then we have 3 officers that are elected. They're elected to 2 years, and then they kind of rotate through. So really we have an officer team that sticks with us. One person will stick with us for about 6 years. And so currently Everett Transit is our president, Kitsap Transit is our treasurer, and Island Transit, or I'm sorry, Intercity Transit is our vice president. Good question, thank you.
Any other questions here? Justin, would you mind handing out those, your handouts to the other people in the audience? Most of these people here are frequent visitors, and one of the applications to your right is an applicant for the executive director position.
And then, of course, the map that I handed out is produced by WashDOT, and that kind of outlines all the public transit agencies' service areas.
And the people behind you are often visitors here, too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excuse me, we'll move this meeting along now then. We'll call for approval of the agenda.
I'll move to approve the agenda.
All right, the motion by Ms. Henderson to approve the agenda is presented, second by Ms. Johnson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes. I didn't ask for any discussion on that. Excuse me just a minute. The next item is the approval of our consent agenda.
Second.
All right, Ms. Johnson, motion to approve the consent agenda as presented, second by Ms. Henderson. Any further discussion, modifications, or anything? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. And consider a motion to approve the minutes. Actually, we don't have to go through that. We've already got through that through the consent agenda. We'll move on to the interim director's, executive director's report. Ken, do you have anything to share with us?
The primary item I have as an information item for the board is that on Friday, actually I believe it was Thursday, but we put it in writing on Friday, Island Transit represented by myself and Chairman Alberg came to agreement with Tiger Construction on the tasks that need to be completed for the sign off on this property. It's been a friendly process that we've gone through, albeit too long. We had the architect involved with the process as well as Tiger and ourselves. But we're pleased with the agreement we've reached, and there are several repairs that need to be completed, which Tiger Construction is going to complete. In fact, they're on site today to begin some of the preliminary work on those repairs. I'll defer any additional comments on that to our chairman, but that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you. And then I was going to touch on that point also. I prefer to have agreements in writing, and we have a confirmation in writing from Tiger about the schedule, what they're going to do, what was agreed upon. Meg has minutes of our telephone conference that we had. The architect also is agreeing in writing about the approval of the completion of this work. And in my review of the documents, the architect still had some things to check off on this before we walk away from it, primarily for legal information. He is the architect of record, The engineers all work under him. That's sign off by him is one of the requirements by the contract documents, and at least I have not been able to find a document that shows that he signed off, and he couldn't find a document that he signed off, so therefore, he probably hasn't signed off. And that's what we're going to get when we walk out of here. So whoever our new executive director becomes, most likely we will have this building closed out and move along. And that is my report for today. Financial analysis report by Paul. You're up next, Paul.
Okay. And this first slide shows our monthly surplus. It's a combination of significant contract reimbursements in the month of February, taxes, and some accounting adjustments that were made because we are paying our bills, some of our 2015 bills in 16. So there were some accounting adjustments to shift some of those expenses back in 15. So the surplus figure that's showing is over $700,000. Our monthly fuel costs remain low. In fact, we're even a little bit lower in the month of February. And you can see this graph shows back about 3 years. And you can see where we are in the history of fuel costs. I created this chart to just show, once again, the price of fuel per gallon and where we are in time. This is a 5-year view. And you can see we're at pretty, very close to historical lows. Definitely for 5 years, but even over a greater span, probably 10 years or so. With our reimbursements that we got from the state, puts us back on track in terms of cash. We're almost 2.6 million. And you can see those two blips that we have both in October and January were our large WISTA payments, so about $1/3 million. And it's also reflected in our reserves. You can see the orange, except in January and September, basically. Our reserves are steadily increasing, and overall cash again is about $2.6 million. And this slide shows our monthly ridership. We had about 71,000 riders in February. It's down about 16% from last year, February.
Ask a question on that.
What's that question?
So when the routes changed, and we know that fewer routes, then we had less ridership. Have we cycled a full year on that? So a drop down now in ridership has nothing to do with the changes in routes?
That's true. Yeah, we made our route revisions both in July and September of 2014. And you can see kind of a change around that time frame. Back to the beginning third of this graphic.
But now when we're comparing a down shift in ridership, it has nothing to do with the routes anymore.
No, I think a lot of it, like we were saying in previous meetings, has to do with the price of fuel. And that's all.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you while you were finishing.
Go right ahead.
The deviated routes have reduced substantially. When I look at all of the trends that you have in there, tell me why the deviated routes were reduced. They're combined routes that you're adjusting down.
I think the definition of deviated, at least since I've been here, has changed slightly. Like which routes are defined as deviated, and that was one of the things that I tried to hammer out with some of our operations personnel. Is what are we calling deviated? I think it's better to try and combine fixed and deviated as one group because both services use large buses and they're on fixed routes in a sense. Although some of those buses can perform deviated functions, like they'll get off the route and pick up maybe a para person. But by and large, they're running similar to what I would consider fixed service. So if you look at those two together, it's a better indicator of what your fixed ridership is. Yeah, Sean might be a better person to explain that, but that's kind of the way I understand it.
But the trend even for your fixed routes, at least since January 2015, has been pretty steady. Those are seasonal adjustments, aren't they, where you have peaks and valleys in that? Can you explain that a little bit better, Sean?
So ask the question again.
Well, if you go January 2015, the fixed route ridership has remained relatively flat, with the exception of a couple of peaks in there. And then you get into December, January, February 2016, and it takes a slight drop. Is there anything that indicates why we would have that when it was relatively flat for the previous 12 months?
I'm not really sure on that.
It's just the way the numbers came out.
Yeah, we haven't made adjustments to make that happen. That's what you're asking.
And then for the van pool, that is fairly consistent, pretty much flat ridership also. Then it takes, in 2016, it takes a little step downward. There must be something in that happened that tells you why we've had reduced ridership in the van pool.
Yeah, so I would pass that back to Paul.
I spoke with our van pool personnel, and we lost a couple van pools recently, and it was because they were retiring. The riders were retiring, and it just happens that way. And I think fuel prices once again has an effect on that as well. Are people willing to jump and use that service? Well, if the price of fuel is really low, maybe they're hesitant to jump into that.
Now they're trading off convenience for the price, and the price is low. And so I put up with the collective ridership.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other questions from the board?
Yeah, just one, and I was going to ask you, while you made the statement that we had $2.6 million in cash.
Oh, sorry.
We do not have $2.6 million in cash. We have $1.3 million in operating funds. The rest is in reserves or assigned reserves, whatever you want to call it. But we do not have $2.6 million in cash.
I apologize, I didn't make that clarification. I did go make an effort in the cash statement to try and clarify that our cash is distributed between various reserves, which is maybe best reflected on this slide.
The other thing that I'd like to bring up, and just maybe we could schedule for a future workshop or something like that, just as we have the mileage costs that we put into reserve on the van pool. I think we need to start looking at doing that with buses and the company cars, because somehow the money for replacements has to come from there. Right now, we've put money in that we put from last year's budget in a lump sum, but we need to be on a mileage charge of some sort to have an ERR fund, if it's going to be a true ERR fund.
Similar to municipal fleets.
Yes.
Now, we made an attempt last year with our TDP to show over 6 years how we were going to try and replace our capital. And it doesn't function on a per mile, it's more just putting certain dollar figures away each year.
But it can function per mile.
It could.
I mean, we talked about this, and
Yeah.
all it is the combination of all the costs associated with running transit divided by the miles that are driven gives you the cost per
Yeah,
mile.
we could do it that way.
Yeah. That way you do it a true replacement cost.
Okay, that's it. Any other comments? Bruce? Good to go. Thank you. And by the way, when we started this meeting, I failed to mention that Lance wasn't here today because of a family emergency. So I'm sorry about not indicating why Lance is not here. He's a respected and valuable member of this board. So thank you very much, Paul. Then we will move on to our regular agenda. Agenda item number 1 is discussion with possible action reinstating Route 412 effective June 6, 2016. And Sean, are you doing this presentation, or are you and Paul doing the presentation?
Me and Ken.
Are you and Ken?
Yes.
Somebody, okay.
I'll introduce it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
The presentation you'll be watching is similar, very similar to the previous presentations you've seen relative to fare revenue and operating costs associated with the present 411W, 411C, and also the proposed 412 route. The presentation today is more of a refinement of previous presentations in response to several questions in several areas that were brought to staff from the board at the last board meeting relative to reduced fares and what the impact of reduced fares is on ridership as well as revenue and costs, and then also what the financial impacts of adding the fourth round trip to 412 would be, since the state allocation provides for funding under 3 round trips, and it was requested that we provide information on how the fourth 412 round trip would be funded. And I sent out an email shortly after last month's board meeting indicating that the state has clarified for us that since we did not provide 412 service in the first year of the biennium, that the entire $500,000 could be spent on this second year, which would be 1 full year of operation of 412. So through that additional funding, we're able to draw on funds to support a 4th round trip. Even though we do have additional funds for even more round trips, I highly recommend that we stay with the 4 round trips because we only have a certain pool of riders from Camino going to Everett, and we don't want that pool to be spread out too far over too many round trips. We want to keep it as condensed as possible, make the service as productive as possible. So I'm recommending we stay with the 4 round trips, and that will, in its entirety, be funded through the state allocated funding. So with that sort of background, Sean, I'll turn it over to you.
Should I turn the light off? That'd be helpful or no?
So there were some questions asked after the last presentation, and so we wanted to provide you some additional information to help assist you in your decision making. So some of those would be approval of staff recommended route for the 412, and we'll show a map shortly to kind of get into that. Determination of base fare to be charged, reduced fare versus no fare. This is for the 412. And this presentation is a combination of the 412 and the 411. So I see there's a couple of agenda items on here, and we're combining those for your decisions. And so on the Route 411W and 411C, the staff recommends delaying the implementation of fares until July of 2017. A couple of the reasons: until such time a reduced fare system can be created and maintained. Continued funding is uncertain, so we're kind of concerned with starting up a fare implementation service for this, and then a year from now losing, the funding for that. And again, the cost of the startup for that, getting that up and running. So those are 3 of the issues for the staff. Ken?
Excuse me, Sean, I might add to that too that There is concern about charging a fare on 411, and then also with the transfer at Marshall's Point to also being required to provide an additional fare to transfer on Skagit Transit. And so there has been concern both in our primarily in our public meetings, but also here amongst board members that riders on 411 maybe are getting hit kind of twice with first the fare from Oak Harbor or Island County, and then an additional fare at Marshall's Point. So that was a concern, and that's been raised also. Very big concern in public meetings.
So here we've prepared a map of the routing for the 412, and this is a map of the previous route, and based on the public input and working with community transit in Everett, this is the route that we've identified if we go forward with reinstating the 412 service. And again, going back to Camino, those stops that we've identified would be in reverse. And what I mean by working with community and Everett, as that community, we share some of the same stops, and so they're allowing us to put our signage on their stops, as well as Everett Station. There was a problem with the bay when we cut service. They were having a tough time in there fitting all the buses, and community transit amped up service, and so there really wasn't a bay for us to use, even if we wanted to reinstate this. And we've worked with them and identified a bay that we would be able to use at any scheduled time that we need to.
I was under the impression that the 412 commuter route was a non-stop route, but we stop on that route along the way?
Yeah, so there's a park and ride heading out in Stanwood, and then there's one right on the freeway as we're heading out.
Yeah.
And then those stops coming into Everett, so we have students and different things like that, so we've always stopped there. So anytime we've talked about renewing the grant, those have always been identified.
Those were significant generators in the previous 412 service. In fact, as I recall, originally 412 service had been established to go directly to Everett Station, and over time these stops were requested by Island Transit riders. So it's express service until we get off the freeway at, I believe, Broadway, and then these were requested stops, such as the Providence Hospital. There's a large segment of riders that got off there. Everett Community College, and then the other stops there, additional stops in the Everett Station. By far, most of the riders using the service still get off at Everett Station, but there are significant groups that get off the other stops.
Are those stops significantly out of the way, or they're just pretty much along the route and you just stop and drop the people? Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead.
Did you know, did everybody else understand that and I just missed this part of it?
I missed that part of it too, because I thought it was an express that you head to a hub and people transfer out of that. And I am envisioning that we're going to have Skagit, we're going to have community transit and island transit passing each other on I-5, essentially providing the same service. How does that make economic sense from top down? That is, from the legislative paying for this system, they're paying the other people for this service also. How are we making sense out of that?
So as far as Skagit's route, I would have to look back to see exactly which route we're going. I don't think they follow the same route into Everett. And so those are the stops that we, would get service requests for that were implemented over time in the past. I don't think you guys missed these because we never, talked about the stops. We hadn't got to this point yet, and we just got a lot of this finalized. So for us, it makes sense because it's what our riders are asking. These aren't Skagit's riders or anything. It's where the people are actually going to in Everett and they're on the way.
Okay, oh, excuse me, let me finish my report. So if we didn't provide that, and when we didn't provide it, what was the alternative? What were they using in order to achieve their destination?
Yeah, that, I'm not 100% sure. From a transit standpoint, they would probably have to get into Everett Station and then head out from there on connecting buses with community.
So, isn't that transportation?
Yeah, it definitely is, yes.
And then the other question that I have for you includes Paul. Paul made a comment to me one time, put you on the spot here, Paul, is that with the grant for this 412, we actually realize a positive cash flow running this route. Is that running this route with these stations or just running the route? Is it a fact that this is a positive cash flow with the grant?
I think it is, because they're reimbursing us for our direct costs and our indirect costs.
Okay.
I don't think the stops themselves make a difference. We really bill, well, we bill based on hours, so a little more time there
Okay.
we would bill for, but, you know, I think it's definitely a positive cash flow.
So if we look at it just in the microscopic portion of Island Transit, it's positive cash flow for that route. If we look at it globally, it's an expensive system compared to the alternative when you have 3 transit systems commingled in that route system. Now, philosophically, should this board look at this globally, or should we look at it from just a isolated microscopic system?
I could probably add one piece to that, is it seems like this route is pretty full, so that even though there might be parallel buses, if ours are full, then it's probably a good use of resources.
Is that a fact? They are full.
They are full.
How about Skagit and Community Transit? Are they full?
So community runs a different type of service. They're kind of localized service. But the Skagit's buses were full also. And so that was one of the areas where we had problems meeting them at I-5, because if they were going to pick up our passengers, we're bringing them a full bus and they already have a full bus. And that's why they didn't want to work with us on that transfer at the time. So yes,
Okay.
full buses.
You just answered my question. I was going to say, why can't we just take people to Stanwood and I-5?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's been a long time sort of discussion we've had with both community and Skagit. They kind of shut the door on us early just for that reason, that they already have full buses. If we were to try to contract with Skagit, they want money from us to provide an additional bus. But they don't have the equipment to do it anyway, so that's kind of a moot issue. But yes, those are full buses, and also certain trips had standing room only vehicles. In fact, we had to go, as I understand it, from the smaller vehicles and kind of work our way up to the 40-foot vehicles to maintain seated loads.
Okay, so then Ken, from a global perspective, it's going to be a legislative policy decision whether they're going to continue funding the overlap. And if they don't fund it, then we just work with the other agencies as best you can.
Well, then we continue our ongoing regional discussions,
Yeah. Okay.
But yes, it's expensive to provide on its own. You know, if we were able to get the right mix of funding and necessary equipment, it would be more efficient to operate with the other organizations as a larger, working piece rather than having piecemeal operations that we do. But that's kind of the ongoing discussion we've had. You know, both politically and publicly and with the legislature.
Now, what if we called the 412 connector with Everett and the connector from Stanwood to Mt Vernon? Would we be able to use that grant money for that? Let's say we eliminate the 411C.
In that case, we can name our entire system 412. My guess is this is probably, it's creative thinking.
Well, and the thing of it is, if you take and make from Stanwood to Mt Vernon, the 412, part of the 412, then you lose that funding that we've gotten the 2.3 million grant for the 411. That the 411 is charged the same way. It's being charged and funded by that one. So if you take the money out of the 412, you can no longer charge the 411.
We're just shift money.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you have more money in the in the subsidy for the 4,
Okay.
because that's not a grant, that was a
So,
subsidy.
I think I just have a couple of comments. One, I'll work through, and then one's going to be a little critical. We've been talking about this for a long time, and every time we talk a little bit more, there's new information to consider. And it's very difficult for me to make a decision like this when I continually get new and different information at each meeting. So until today, I was under the impression that we were running a commuter route, and that once people connected at the Everett station, that they went onto the Everett station to get where they're going. Now today I learned that we're not in fact just running a commuter route, we're also providing in-county service stops to folks, which may not be the end of the world, although it changes the model in my head about what we were trying to do, which was just to simply get them from one transit stop to a connector stop, and we were providing this kind of direct connector service. I just needed that information earlier, and it's, again, I'm frustrated with the fact that we continually have these items on our agenda to make decisions, and we get new information every single time. So if we're going to make a decision today, is this it? I mean, are we going to learn something else next week that we don't know? Because I have to say that this came out of nowhere, at least for me, because I didn't go to the Camino meeting, that wasn't my district. But this is a different model than what we're doing on our other connector routes that we're charging service for. I mean, if you think about the 411W, right? We're not even getting them to a city. We're just connecting them to a connection point. We're charging the exact same price for people who are driving 45 minutes, and they're getting customized stops per their request. I needed to know this earlier.
Well, you can adjust that thought by the fare.
I'm not going to adjust any thought that I needed to know this earlier. I mean, it is frustrating to sit here and get new information every single time we're at a decision point. And I'm sorry to be that blunt about it, but it's every single time. I don't understand why we can't get our ducks in a row so we can make a good decision. It's really beyond my comprehension that we continually have new information at the decision point every single time. And so I'm not going to make a decision today for myself, just so we know that I'm out of the game, because I don't have the facts I need to make good choices. And I would encourage the rest of you to have the same concern.
Any response on that from the board? Hearing none, I'll make a response on that. I kind of feel that this whole process is a working process. I don't think that anybody in this organization, including the board, has all of the answers as we're trying to create a fair structure and also work in the constraints that we have with the funding. For example, the 412 has different requirements of collection, fares, the requirements to receive that money than for the 411. So I share some of your frustration, Jill. I also recognize that it is a work in progress, but it's a work in progress for me that's not going fast enough.
I get that. The city and the county run different, i.e. how we handle projects. So we don't make decisions as we go. When we make decisions at the county commission, we have all of our facts. We know the pros and cons. We know the cost. The restrictions in the grant funding are known. So there isn't anything to learn on that. Those are known restrictions, right? The cost that we're looking at charging is a known. The timeline is a known. The stops should have been a known. I'm not, the only variable in this is ridership, right? And whether or not we're gonna charge a reduced fare for individuals who have, who are financially unable to pay or at an age point or, you know, an income point. Those are the only variables relate to the people. But the entire system presentation were known quantities and known facts, and there should be no variables in the knowns. That's all I am trying to say. These stops, this is a philosophical conversation about the stops, and we should have knocked those questions out in the beginning of these discussions. Where are we willing to provide service and where are we not? Not at the end point where we're making a decision of, okay, now we're going to provide service and now we're going to add all these layers in there. And I'm very linear and I'm aware of my weaknesses in decision making, but I don't understand how this wasn't sequentially presented to us so that we know the decision at the end. It's a free-for-all.
Okay, before you bail, make a decision to bail on the decision, let's let Sean go through his presentation, because I think you have more in here that relates to money, which is important to all of us. And let's get the entire presentation, and maybe it is covered in this thing. Paul, or Ken.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, I do want to state that from the beginning, reinstating Route 412, the understanding of reinstating Route 412, at least at the staff level, was that Route 412 would be reinstated identical to the previous Route 412. And these stops are a part of the previous 412 service. So we were possibly remiss in not providing all the stop information, but it did fall under the request of us to provide the identical same service on the 412 as the previous 412. So we're just mirroring the previous service through this presentation.
The profile of the 412 may have been somewhat lost or misunderstood because we had considerable conversation about having a transfer point near Arlington or some other place as a hub so that we're not duplicating these routes. And that's what is transfixed in my mind. And I do believe that this list of stops is the first time I've actually seen that list of stops. But I don't know that it makes any difference in terms of what is the bottom line, what is the impact to this system. In my mind, it's inefficient having three transit systems passing each other, but in terms of where we go forward today, setting up the model for the 412 and executing for the ridership, this doesn't make any difference to me because as long as what you say is when we do this, we have a positive cash flow, we're not subsidizing this system at the expense of our in-district routes. And I see both of you shaking your head.
That's true.
We are not subsidizing that. It is positive cash flow. So I don't like going to Everett, but I think that's the alternative to deal with right now before the board today.
And Mr. Chairman, I would also like to add that the original service was set up, the original being the original 412, was set up to go to Everett Station. These stops evolved after that initial service started to Everett Station at the request of Camino riders. So this wasn't set up originally with the previous 412, but these stops evolved in listening to the needs and the expectations of Camino riders wanting to get closer to their destinations on the way to Everett Station.
So the board could say, we're going, today, the board could say, we're only going to Everett Station, period. Or we could say, we're going to make these stops along the way, It's going to provide convenience for our riders, but the money is not going to change in terms of a negative impact on the bottom line for us.
No,
So-
and I would predict that if we started out just Everett Station, that we would have all of the riders from those routes on our doorstep clamoring to have the stops reinstated.
Okay. Let's allow Sean to, excuse me.
If the buses from Skagit and from our places are full, if you take those stops off, what are they gonna ride on? We just go from A to B. And there's a whole lot of people that are gonna stop on all these places.
They would get on the local transit system in that transit area.
But that bus is full.
Well, they'd make it
That's
to, they'd
not
make it to
our
Everett.
problem.
They'd make it to Everett, and then they inter-city.
They'd have to transfer back out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to solve other transit districts' problems. We're continually going down there
Well, there are
lobbying for
people,
our
they're
money.
the Camino people we're talking about here.
Well, and then the state should design a regionalized system that funds it. But my point is that they haven't done that, and we continually offer up solutions for people, which I understand the focus on the people, but at the same time, we're never going to get to the solution while we continue to sit there and put a Band-Aid on a problem that's not ours.
Let's move forward and let Sean do the rest of his presentation, and then we can hash this out. It's going to be an up and down go one way or
So, Jill, I think you wanted to see the demographics, and so we've put together, combined some of the demographic from the data that we collect as far as elderly and youth, and the other would be, those that would pay, we assume to pay full fare. But what isn't translated in the pie chart is the tracking of the disabled, of the Medicaid recipients, or the veteran riders. We just don't account for that within our data. So if you add those in, whatever those percentages would come out to be, that's going to affect the ones paying the full fare.
Well, I guess it wouldn't matter on 412. So at 412, if you figure 90% of your riders would pay probably less than that if we figured out the disabled portion.
Right.
Let's say that 85% of your riders would pay, and then you have the fall off of ridership that's anticipated because of the fare. Is there enough money in the system now to make it pay for itself if we gave a discount to a certain population?
I think the answer is the fares would not cover the cost of this operation. Of course, we rely on state funding for that, but it would meet that recovery ratio.
That's what I meant.
And on this particular chart, the question was asked how much it would cost to run an additional round trip for the 412. And that would be approximately $87,000 per year. And we also put in there the operating cost per mile for the 412, would be $5.08. We've also added the cost per mile for the 411W and the 411C.
So is this adding more than the 4 routes? No, or the,
No,
just
that's the cost of one single round trip for the 412. And so we would be doing 4 of those. Okay. And on this one, we would just point out the annual ridership for the 412. And we took the 4 most populated runs at that time before the service was cut in 2013. And then also the operating cost again for that. I'm sorry, what I meant to say is, so the recovery ratio is another thing we wanted to point out. So on the 412 there, we've added that across for the 412, the 411W and the 411C, just to help assist in your decision making. And again, we're just showing here the cost, and number of round trips possible with the available funds. And again, we've identified the 4 trips on the 412. So back to the decisions at hand. Again, just as a reminder of some of the things that the board would need to consider.
If we had a reduced fare on the 412, then would we have the ability to not do a reduced fare on the 411, or do we need to make those decisions in tandem? So for example, if we say students ride for $1, or would we have the ability to say on the 411, you ride for $2 no matter what? Or when we put in place an exemption or a reduced fare, does it apply system-wide? Because if so, I need to look at those two together.
Would you like to answer that?
Do we have the lights,
Yeah, you ready?
please? That's the end of your, thanks, Sean.
We have to do the same thing.
So can we go back to the slide that shows the demographic profiles by all the different routes?
So you want the demographics for
Well,
the
the pie chart's
Pie
probably
chart.
the easiest to see,
Okay.
and I'll guesstimate.
Would you qualify that statement that all fares have to be straight across the board?
The reduced fares, I mean, you can't have one route with one set of reduced fares. and
Okay,
Another route with another set of reduced
Thanks.
fares.
So on the 411s, without putting in veterans or disabled, just looking at the populations that we were considering that we know about, we're already at 69% and 71%, assuming 100% ridership, right? And we're still going to reduce that further once you factor in veterans and disabled, if we factor in those
and
populations.
then whatever the loss would be.
So, and then a 20% fall off is what we thought. So now we're down at 69, 49, minus maybe 10% more. So now we're down at 39% of the riders are paying fare. Do we hit our recovery rate then? Because otherwise we can't offer a discount on any of the routes, even the ones we can afford it on, if we can't afford to offer a discount on the other 411 routes.
I think in the further, the more financial charts will show you that you're going to hit your recovery ratio even if you charge nothing to those, at least with this population.
The 412.
And the 412, if you don't charge anyone, if you charge 0 to what we call a reduced fare, which would be your elderly, youth, and college, you'll still hit your recovery ratio. Dropping at 10%, you're still going to be pretty close there. I think we were showing like 8.6% at 0 cost for reduced riders. So I think you're going to be in the ballpark with 412.
But we can't discriminate between the two routes, so now go to the 411.
Well, 411, if you're assuming that you're now going to be, maybe have 60% of your riders as commuters, it'll drop our revenue figures, but I think it probably won't affect a reimbursement rate from the state.
I was gonna say, we're not, there's no tie-in to the recovery rate for the 412, or 411 funding.
I get that from a funding standpoint, but from a business
Right.
model standpoint, why would we enter into a decision that needs to be further subsidized, right? So if we go out there and recover $75 and it costs us $80, sure, the state grant makes up maybe the difference on that, but the reality is it was a very bad business decision. So I'm trying to make sure that we're making a good business decision regardless of the subsidized funding that comes. If none of that funding was there, what does that look like for us?
I think if we were to look at like the total fare collection for a year, we might be looking in the range of $150,000, whereas the cost of this service over a year is over $1 million. So just,
That's not
looking
what
at
I'm
the two.
asking. I'm sorry, I'm not obviously communicating well. What I'm saying is, I